All Blacks depth chart for 2023 Rugby World Cup, folks. With the All Blacks having named their squad for the Rugby World Cup, let's have a look at the players they have used in this entire Rugby World Cup cycle and see where have they invested their development time well and where have things kind of not paid off, which guys have kind of fallen off the radar. If you guys were watching any YouTube rugby content back in 2019, you may remember the guys from the 10-14 did a depth chart series where they analysed each of the teams. And they had this model that, like, you want your starting guy to have 50% of the minutes across the Rugby World Cup cycle. Your backup should have like 30%, and then the backup to the backup should have like 20%. So you've still got a bit of cohesion with your main guys getting half the game time, and then still more than kind of token minutes for the backup guys. Well, let's have a look. Sadly, those guys aren't making content anymore, but let's have a look at the All Blacks for 2023 and see just how close or not they have come to that kind of model. If we look at the entire squad for seasons 2020 through 2023 thus far, it looks like a bunch of colours, doesn't it? The main ones that strike out to me, as you can see, your starting number 8 has played a lot of minutes. Likewise, your starting 13, those guys in green have got, a heck of a chunk of the minutes. But then the ones that kind of pop out to me, based on what those 10-14 guys said was kind of an ideal model, your number 9 looks to have had about half the minutes with decent minutes with both the backups. And then also, I would say, your hookers, starting guy seems to have around about half of the time. And then the backups seem to have decent chunks as well. There's not one position where it's like, 90% or 80% or even 70% for one guy. But then you look at loose head and it looks like, they've used a variety of guys. Likewise, the 11 and 12 positions, they don't really have a kind of out-and-out starting guy, and even, you could say, at tight head as well. But a lot of these numbers and colours that are on this depth chart aren't going to the World Cup. What we're interested in is, how does this look position by position going into the World Cup? Well, let's have a look. We'll start with the front row. 1, 2, and 3. And the grey are all the minutes of guys that played who did not make the squad for the World Cup, the initial squad anyway. So, obviously, number 1, goodness gracious me, looks at a glance a little bit concerning. The guy there in green is Ethan de Groot. He's had around about a quarter of the game time, which is not the 50% kind of target that those 10-14 guys set. Now, I think as All Blacks fans, you'd still be pretty happy that de Groot's going to be your main guy because he's been in cracking form and has come along a long way in this Rugby World Cup cycle. He wasn't on the scene at this level at the start of the Rugby World Cup cycle, so those minutes weren't there to give him. But yeah, he's not had a heck of a lot of game time in this World Cup cycle in the scheme of things. And then behind him, you've got Tuangafasi in blue and Tamaiti Williams in yellow. Tamaiti Williams has only made his kind of test debut in the last few weeks. So, yeah, guys like George Bauer, Joe Moody, Carl Tuinukuafe, even Alex Hodgman, those guys are all there in the grey. I mean, Bauer, by pure minutes, would have been the kind of leading candidate for that loose head spot going into the World Cup, but his injury means he's out. Moody, with his injuries, has also not made the squad, and then Tuinukuafe ended up going to France. So with those guys, you're looking at half of the game time at loose head over the last World Cup cycle has just kind of disappeared. But as I said, the emergence of de Groot and Tamaiti Williams, I think, is encouraging enough that it doesn't seem all kind of doom and gloom. Those guys are young, and they have come along really well. Hooker, on the other hand, is basically the model that those guys set out. Cody Taylor has played just under half the minutes. He's there in green. That's pretty much optimal. Tokiaho has played just under a third of the game time, and Coles has played around a fifth of the game time. So I think that looks really nice. That's the perfect model, isn't it? I mean, you got Almua there, who's played a bit of game time, who's kind of missed out. But ultimately, I think that's very stable, very strong at hooker. And then tight head is a bit of a mix between Lomax there in green and Laulala there in blue. They've played very similar amount of game time. You've got Tuangafasi there as well, but they've kind of seen him more on the other side of the scrum in recent times. And then Fletcher Newell there in purple. Ta'avau's there in grey. With his injuries, he's kind of missed out. But the All Blacks have kind of avoided the depth problem at tight head by just taking all the tight heads, haven't they? They've taken 6 props to the World Cup. So depth there shouldn't be that much of an issue. But Tuangafasi's versatility, I guess, and Tamaiti Williams's as well, will be certainly kind of beneficial. So that's the front row for the All Blacks. Locks is also, I think, pretty stable. They've taken the main guys. Obviously, number 4, your tight head lock, Brodie Retallick. Plays around about half of the game time. And then behind him in blue, Sam Whitelock. So whichever one you go with, you're getting some class. And then on the other side, number 5, Scotty Barrett there in green, and then Sam Whitelock there in blue. So Sam Whitelock, if you added his 2 blue ones together, is certainly one of your kind of number 1 performers, but he splits his time between 2 different jersey numbers. And then Tupavai there in yellow on the number 5 side has also certainly had a bit of game time. And both Scotty Barrett and Vai are there on the number 4 side with kind of token minutes as well. The main minutes that have not showed up for the World Cup are Patrick Tuipulotu and Josh Lord. But I think as All Blacks fans, you'd be pretty happy with the guys that have been selected. There's obviously a bit of an injury cloud around Brodie Retallick, the way he kind of slowly got up to the stage for the All Blacks squad announcement. A little bit concerning, but look how much game time Sam Whitelock's had behind him. Hopefully Brodie gets fit, and everything should be hunky-dory until then. The back row is a little bit of a different story, with the number 6 jersey being one that a lot of minutes have kind of not made their way onto the plane to France. The number 6 gets a little bit messy. It's often the position when there's yellow cards that guys kind of miss out. We take that into account. The yellow card time doesn't go on here. And sometimes there's backs who pack down on the scrum. When one of the guys has been yellow carded, but I'm not putting the bloody backs' names on here because ultimately that's not the reason they're in the team, is it? But for the guys at number 6, Shannon Frizzell is there in green. He's not quite your main guy for total minutes in this Rugby World Cup cycle. Akira Ioane actually had more time at 6 than he did, so he is a big chunk of that kind of grey column. Akira not being selected, but obviously in recent times, Shannon has been kind of playing the house down, and in 2023, certainly he's had the lion's share of the minutes, so it's kind of fitting that he's there. But then behind him, you got Scotty Barrett in blue, Luke Jacobson in yellow, and then Ardie Savia in purple. So I guess Luke Jacobson's kind of versatility, and I guess Ardie Savia's as well, is another option at 6, and then Scotty Barrett too. But I guess you wouldn't want Shannon Frizzell to go down injured based on the number of time that he has spent as kind of a specialist 6 at test level. Ethan Blackadder is also another guy who missed out as well as Samipeni Finau. Blackadder being injured kind of made that decision for the coaches, didn't it? But Akira's one is kind of purely selection. Number 7, a wee bit more stable man at Sam Cane and Dalton Papali'i. Very similar to the numbers that we saw from the locks in terms of Brodie Retallick and Sam Whitelock, Sam Cane, Dalton Papali'i. I mean, if Cane ain't fit, it's going to be Papali'i. That's kind of goes without saying. And if Cane is fit, he is going to start and he is going to dominate the minutes. Ardie Savia is also there in yellow for 7. So 7's pretty well covered, I think you would say. A lot more than 6 in terms of guys who can specialise in 7. Ardie being a former 7 and then Dalton being a 7. Blackadder is there in grey as well, having had a bit of time at 7 for the ABs, but not made the World Cup squad. And then number 8, Ardie Savia there at number 8 in green, has had more minutes in any one position than any other player for the All Blacks this campaign. More than 60% of the game time, Ardie Savia has been there at 8. Luke Jacobson's there in blue. And then you've had other guys fill in 8 for kind of token minutes. But yeah, it's basically going to be Savia or Jacobson. You'd imagine Jacobson, based on the kind of pecking order at the moment, is going to probably start against the likes of Uruguay maybe. But yeah, Sotutu is the main guy who misses out. Obviously, Soakula got some really token minutes in the All Blacks number 8 position. Akira has kind of covered number 8 in a pinch as well. But yeah, based on the loosies, 7 main 2 guys, and then Frizzell and Savia have of the guys who've been selected have certainly had by far the lion's share of the time. So yeah, a fair bit of time has gone down the drain with Akira not making the squad. But yeah, that's your forwards. For the backs, I think number 9 highlights the importance of Aaron Smith. Aaron Smith is there in green with around about half of the game time, and Finlay Christie is there in blue, and then there's a wee little sliver of Cam Roigard, because he is one of your bolters who's made the squad having only played that one test. He's made it ahead of guys like TJ Perenara, who's obviously been a long time out injured, and Brad Weber, who was fit and available, captain of the All Blacks 15, but hasn't made the squad. Fakatava likewise hasn't made the squad. So there's a decent chunk of time that hasn't made the squad. Christie's had more time than Brad Weber in this World Cup cycle, but Cam Roigard's obviously had way less than Brad Weber. So yeah, if anything, don't let Aaron Smith get injured, please. 10 is the one position where every single minute is still on the plane, because you've got Mo'unga, Bodie, and D-Mac. Green, blue, yellow. Those are your 3 guys. Obviously, Bowden has been playing more fullback in recent times, but yeah, there's no worry about any guy who's kind of pulled out injured or been dropped, because our 3 guys who play 10 go on to the World Cup. And I think in terms of depth, I mean, D-Mac would obviously like to have had a little bit more game time there, but he's gotten it in 2023, which is pleasing. But in terms of teams who've got like 3 guys who can play 10, I think the All Blacks are pretty happy with that depth. If one of these guys goes down, I think we're pretty well covered. Midfield-wise is a little bit of an interesting one, just because of the way, especially the 12 jersey has kind of changed over time. 12 is really messy. Like, your main guy there at 12 is David Havili in green, with just under like 40% of the game time. But remember, he clocked up a lot of that game time in 2021, 2022. And he was competing with guys like Goodhue in 2020, who's obviously not made it. Tupaya, who's had a lot of game time in like 2021. He's been injured. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, that experiment ended up going down the drain. So there's a lot of game time in that 12 jersey, which is gone. And then you've got blue, which is Geordie Barrett. So his emergence as the kind of premier 12 in New Zealand rugby has seen him kind of overtake Havili, despite the fact that he's played way less game time in that position. You've also got ALB there in yellow. So yeah, them deciding who is going to be their 12 has been a bit of a revolving door. But Geordie Barrett, despite, as I said, not being the top guy for minutes in that position, seems to have a lock on it at the moment. But 13 is way more stable, with Rico having like almost 60% of the game time there in 13. ALB's there in blue. And the guys like Enor and whatnot, Peter Umaga Jensen very briefly, have kind of not made it. So, yeah, Geordie and Rico seem to be a lock, but they have taken more midfielders than just that. And then your outside backs, left wing is affected by the departure of George Bridge to France. Remember, he got a lot of game time, back 2021 before he went to France. But Caleb Clark is your leading guy there in green. Rico Ioane has had a bit of game time there in blue, although it's been a while since we've seen him kind of start on the wing. But I think it was like 2020, he was starting on the wing for a few games. Lester Fainganuku's there in yellow, and then Mark Talea is there in purple. So those guys are kind of relatively late emergers in the Rugby World Cup cycle. And remembering Sever Reece played a fair bit of left wing as well, but his injury means he is not there too. Right wing is a wee bit more stable with Will Jordan taking around about half of the game time. Geordie Barrett, interestingly, there on the right wing, if you're thinking all the way back to 2020 when they were starting him on the right wing for a wee while. And then Talea, as I mentioned, emerges as one of your guys. Also Narawa is the guy they've taken based on one test performance, but he's looked pretty good. Again, Sever Reece on the right wing is also a fair bit of game time gone. Stevenson and Bridge as well, guys who didn't end up going. And then fullback, almost all of the guys who played fullback are on the World Cup, barring Stephen Perofeta. Stephen Perofeta is that little grey sliver at the top. Otherwise, Geordie Barrett has had the chunk of things, and then his brother Bodie there in blue, so green and blue for the 2 Barrett brothers. D-Mac there in yellow, and then Will Jordan with that one game Starting at fullback in a couple of games where he shifted to fullback there in purple. Still not that much game time for him at fullback. But yeah, so overall, man, what does that look like? Obviously, like Savia has dominated across the last few years. Richie Moonga, Rico Ioane, all those guys are around about kind of 60% of the game time. And then the noticeable shifts of guys like Geordie, his position has certainly shifted. And then the injury toll we've had at Loosehead has made things a wee bit messy there. But I think also the emergence of guys like De Groot, like a Roy Gard, like Tamaiti Williams, that's also pretty pleasing. These guys may not be that kind of well represented in terms of how many minutes they've got across the few years, but and Narawa as well, Talea. These guys have proved that they're good enough in recent times. So despite their age or lack of experience, I mean, if you're good enough, you're good enough. So yeah, what's the most picked 15 and who are the biggest losers? The biggest losers, obviously, in terms of minutes. I mean, George Bauer, I can't help the fact that he got injured. Joe Moody, likewise, he's one of the biggest losers. TJ Perenara. I think personally, Brad Weber. I mean, it doesn't really show on the depth chart because he only had like 10% of the minutes at 9 anyway. So you wouldn't have said a guy who's played 10% of the game time is a real lock to get into the squad. But I think for what he's kind of given to New Zealand rugby, he's pretty unfortunate. Potentially, Hoskins Satutu as well played about a fifth of the game time at number 8. But some of the Blues guys are maybe just form-wise not at the races compared to some of the others. I mean, Goodhughes obviously had trouble with injury. Quinn Tupaya, his injury, Sevu Reese's injury have just meant those guys have missed out. Some of the guys who've got a taste, like Perafeta, like RTS, like Pirigas Sawakula, either the coaches didn't think that they had the chops, or maybe we didn't see them get enough game time. There's been a couple of guys who decided to take the money abroad, like Tuina Koafe, like Bridge, but yeah. Pleasingly, I think the majority of the minutes are still here for the All Blacks. So that's at least one thing which is kind of stable. The most picked 15 you'd be looking at, based on the guys who are left, it'd be De Groot, Taylor, and Lomax. If Bauer were available, he would have had more minutes than De Groot. Second row is going to be Retallick and Barrett. And then a back row of Frizzell, Kane, and Savia. It's Akira Ioane if he was picked, but because he's not, it's Frizzell. Smith and Moonga, 9-10. Havili and Ioane, 12 and 13, although based on 2023 game time, it'll certainly be Geordie Barrett. And then the back three of Clark, Will Jordan, and Geordie Barrett. But based on 2023, it's going to be Talea, Will Jordan, and Bodie Barrett. So, yeah, there you go, folks. The All Blacks seem to have kind of managed things relatively well. Like I mentioned, there's been a few guys who've kind of fallen off the pace. There's been a few guys who've gotten themselves injured, and there's been a few guys who've had positional changes. But overall, I mean, apart from like loose head prop, there's not too many guys that have only played really limited game time who who make the plane as kind of the leading candidate for their position. But as I said, got heaps of faith in De Groot anyway. But yeah, you guys let us know your thoughts. How do you reckon the All Blacks squad is going to go at the World Cup? Obviously, some of these guys will end up making the squad who've missed out, because there certainly will be injuries between now and whenever the All Blacks finish up their World Cup campaign. But yeah, cheers for watching, guys. If you ever want to do the Buy Me a Beer thing, link down in the description for that, because that video took a lot of time in terms of watching the bloody games and who went on and who went off, and who got subbed for who and who switched to which position. But I find it fascinating, so pleased to do it either way. Drop us a like, subscribe to the channel, all that usual stuff, and yeah, I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.